Our scripture comes from Daniel, the 3rd chapter, starting at verse 8. At this time, some astrologers came forth and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, and the pipe, all kinds of music, fall down and worship the image of God, the image of gold. And those who does not worship and fall down will be thrown into blazing fire. But there are some Jews you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, Your Majesty. They neither serve your God nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not worship my God or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the harp, the flute, the lyre, the pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing fire, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we were thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve will deliver us from your Majesty's hands. But even if he does not, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your God or worship the image that you have set up." Our topic this morning is God has my back. Have you ever had a friend to tell you that he or she had your back when trouble come your way? Have you ever had a family member or a co-worker to tell you, no matter what you do, I've got your back? Sometimes we think the church has our back, but the church fails us. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to believe that God had their back because of all the things they went through. We too have to have the faith that God has our back, because when things go wrong in our lives, God was still there. God has brought us through so many circumstances and situations. As we look back over our life, we can see that it had to have been God who was there with us. After Nebuchadnezzar has been successful in expanding the boundaries of Babylon, and after his borrowed power had been used to consolidate a stronghold on the territory, King Nebuchadnezzar sought to celebrate his own success. And what he decided to do was build an image to celebrate his success. According to verse 1 in Daniel of the 3rd chapter, he built a solid gold image on a fat plains in Dura in Babylon that stood 90 feet high, 9 feet wide, and 24-karat gold. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were captured by King Nebuchadnezzar's soldiers and carried from the hills of Jerusalem and taken in shackles to a lowly land of Babylon. Even as they were brought there as slaves, they were elevated from slaves to servants in the king's court. They showed us that no matter what our circumstances, God can elevate us from our current situation. God has our back during our troubled times, during our hardship, during our suffering, and we see that these 3 Hebrew boys served God during their struggles. While they were being captive and being held as prisoners, they lost everything that they worked for when they were brought to Babylon, but they didn't lose their faith. Here are 3 ways that the Hebrew boys knew that God had their back. 1, they had a relationship with God. They had unshakable faith because during their struggles and hardship, they knew God had their back. They believed that their God would never leave them nor forsake them. How many of us have that unshakable faith in God? No matter what comes our way, are we going to stand on the promises that God would never leave us nor forsake us, stand on the promises that God will always be there with us? And do you have the strong relationship with God. They knew who was in control. They knew King Nebuchadnezzar was not in control because the God they serve controls everything. When the Hebrew boys stood their ground, they were not afraid of King Nebuchadnezzar because they knew that Nebuchadnezzar was not in control over anything and that God was in control of what was going to happen next. The three Hebrew boys, God is all powerful and has control over life, death, and the grave. They were faithful in their service to God and that God would reward them for their faithfulness. They were committed to God. When these three men were younger and new in Babylon, they took their stand for God and committed themselves to God and God alone. This commitment that they took seriously, they are faced with their own death and still they are determined to serve God. The king issued a decree that whenever the band plays his song in his honor, everybody was to bow down and worship this golden image. When the people would hear the music play, they had to bow down or be placed in the furnace of the blazing fire. When the music played, all bowed but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When the king heard the three Hebrew boys were not going to bow, he summoned them and asked them the question. I've heard that you three boys refused to bow down once the music started playing. What is your problem, and why can't you three fellows follow instructions like the rest of the people? I heard Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say to the king, King, we are not like the rest of the people. We only have one God that we bow down for, and our God is not some golden statue that doesn't have any power. King Nebuchadnezzar's people served the God of whomever the sitting king was at the time. So many gods were worshipped during their lifetime. Nebuchadnezzar gave them another chance. Bow down when the music started or be placed in the fiery furnace. The three Hebrew boys in verse 16 said that we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. In other words, they were saying, no matter what the consequences are, we're not going to please you and bow down to your false gods. Verse 17 said, if we are thrown into the fiery furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us. He's able to deliver us from your hands. In other words, O king, throw us in the fire because the God we serve has our back, and the God we serve will deliver us from the fiery furnace. The God we serve will be a fence all around us, and the God we serve will be a shield us from the flames. Verse 18 says, but if God does not, we want you to know, King, that we will not serve your God or worship the image of gold that you have set up, because the God we serve has all power and has our back during our rough times. And God had our back in the midst of the storm. When things look bad, God turned it around for our good. You see, I can hear Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego saying as I close, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me, because God has my back. He has my back when I'm sick. He has my back when I'm in trouble. He has my back when I need a friend. He has my back in the midst of the storm. You may throw us in the fiery furnace, but God has my back. God bless you.